Alex Marlowe here, editor-in-chief of Breitbart News. Here with Revolver News is Darren Beattie. Darren, it's great to finally get to talk to you in person.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you.
So we're at Turning Point USA America Fest in Arizona. You're someone who's built a really strong grassroots following over the last few years in media. What do you think are the issues that are resonating with grassroots conservatives that maybe people are missing?
Well, you know, one thing more than anything else, if there's a broad theme running through our investigative reporting, it's this, that the national security state has been reconfigured and weaponized politically in order to silence and suppress the energies associated with Donald Trump's victory in 2016. That's the broad thematic. It encompasses the issue of tech censorship, which, as we're learning, it's not simply an issue of woke private companies acting in their own sort of narrow capacity to censor people. Yes, there are woke employees throughout, these companies, but ultimately it's coming from the government, it's coming from the national security state, and we've reported on this extensively, and now you see in the Twitter files this being substantiated in a way that nobody can deny. So national security state is the bottleneck, the censorship issue. We see the national security state's role in, for instance, Russiagate from very early on, trying to basically circumvent, subvert the presidency of Trump. And then a third dimension, which is probably what we're most known for in terms of our investigative reporting, is January 6th. And we've shown, I think, quite powerfully, that there's a strong case to be made that the federal government itself was involved in certain key elements of January 6th, to the point that we've coined this term Fedsurrection that has taken on. And so again, there's a theme running through the whole thing, which is that the national security state is really the chief bottleneck to political progress. And unless and until we put the national security state in its place, until we bring them to heel, unfortunately, most of our politics will remain fake and performative.
It's really evident just about everywhere within the deep state that this is happening, because if you think about where the DOJ's priorities have been, it's moms who don't like trans kids, harassing their children at school, and people think our education system and the lockdowns were too woke and too aggressive, and that's the problem for our DOJ. So if that's the perspective of that part of the government, and another part of the government, the FBI, is colluding with Twitter to censor certain speech, and it goes deeper than that. It feels like we're really just scratching the surface, but the trick is, how do we go deeper as journalists, as conservatives, concerned citizens? How do we go deeper to figure out what's going on and eventually unwind it?
Well, look, we just need to investigate, and you need to operate with the appropriate heuristics. And again, what I think Revolver has been so good at, and part of the reason that we're so effective, is that we go beyond sort of the typical, the left-right thing, or, look at the latest outrage that AOC did, and that kind of thing. Like there's a place for that, but ultimately you want to look at, why haven't we been effective? Yes. Why haven't we been effective even when we win elections? Why is it that despite all of the great things Trump did, in so many ways he wasn't able to do what he wanted to do because of the impediments that existed within the bureaucracy that he nominally controlled? Why is that the case? And to explain that, you really need to look at what the national security state's role in politics is. And there's a long history of this, and in fact, in some ways, the left is more attuned to this, because in a previous era of American politics, the national security state was somewhat weaponized against the left in many ways. And so, the regime doesn't like to reinvent their own playbook. If there's an antecedent for something, chances are this exists today in some modified fashion. There was, Project Mockingbird, in which the federal government, the intelligence agencies infiltrated the media, and now we have its modern day digital equivalents that we're seeing in terms of this whole economy of quote-unquote disinformation experts who are basically censoring domestic political speech under the pretext of this term disinformation, which is a national security term, which basically means not only are these people bad people, but they're national security threats for disagreeing with us, and therefore we need to invoke the full weight and force of the American national security state to destroy our political enemies. And that's really where we are as a country at this point.
And the clearest evidence has been the Twitter files to date in terms of just clearness of it. But of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Do we have any hope that we might learn the truth about what Google is doing, perhaps, which I think is much more nefarious than Twitter? And I'm sure Meta is just as bad. Luckily, we have this rogue, Elon Musk, who I'm critical of in some ways, but is doing something very positive with these Twitter files. But we kind of got lucky that happened. And if we don't get lucky again, how are we going to figure out the truth about what's going on between the feds and Google?
Right. No, I mean, it's a great point. And again, we did get lucky. And it's one of these things. It's like, if you really think about it, it's kind of unfortunate and even a little bit pathetic that Elon Musk has done more for free speech on the internet than any elected Republican official. And the thing is again, it's like, this comes from the private sector. I almost joke that instead of going through the process of another election cycle, wasting millions and millions and sometimes billions cumulatively on more elections that don't deliver anything, we should set up like a SPAC fund, put that money in the SPAC fund, and then figure out which tech company we should engage in a hostile takeover of and establish free speech there, because that seems to have been the proven model with Elon Musk. So maybe we need to get a little bit more creative about how we harness and channel our resources and power. But ultimately, you're right. Google is a huge animal unto itself. There's something called Project Jigsaw. If you're listening to this, look it up. There's an individual called Jared Cohen, who is literally like the pioneer in many ways of the whole reappropriating national security social media strategies that are originally designed to combat ISIS and nefarious actors in the Middle East and such, to direct against political speech that the regime doesn't like domestically. And so there's a whole rabbit hole unto itself when you look at what Google is doing, what its subsidiary YouTube is doing in terms of the algorithms. And again, there's so many dimensions of the story that remain to be fully told.
So I want to talk about January the 6th. Do you think that we as a conservative movement, and I've spoken to people who were present, who are real hardcore, way out there, but others who were very reasonable and just wanted to support President Trump. Right. And it really was a diverse group of conservatives who were there. Do you think we could have recognized that this was going to ultimately be used against us and was going to get milked as much as it has been? I mean, still today, as we're having this conversation, the January the 6th committee is still there and trying to control news cycles.
Right. Well, it's a vexed issue because, again, it's like if we take it too far, that we can conclude, okay, we should never have gatherings in public places again. And frankly, that's why the feds infiltrate these types of things and create provocative situations, precisely so that people say, okay, real life meetings are too dangerous and this and that. And that's an unfortunate conclusion. I think that's taking it too far. But I think people definitely need to be cautious, and people need to be cognizant of the fact that every meeting such as this, there are going to be provocateurs. There are going to be people like Ray Epps, whom people listening to this may have heard of, who will try to escalate things, who may not be acting in a genuine fashion. And of course, there are also just going to be crazies who aren't feds, but they might as well be because they're not acting in a manner that's consistent with our best interests. So we need to be more careful than the other side, because the other side controls federal bureaucracy. And the other side, from, for instance, the Whitmer kidnapping plot, which has 1 million legal problems with it, which looks, broadly speaking, like an entrapment operation. It was, in many ways, the October surprise before the election. It was conducted by the FBI under Trump, which gives you a sense what I was saying of, like, we don't control the government even when we control the presidency. And just as a little tidbit, little detail about that, the individual who oversaw that entrapment operation in Michigan, the day after the so-called plotters were arrested, that individual is called Stephen D'Antuono, was promoted by Christopher Wray to run the Washington, D.C. field office, where he went on to oversee the January 6th investigation, the critical months leading up to January 6th and after, and actually became the public face of the pipe bomb investigation, and recently, very, very quietly and suspiciously retired on the heels of certain explosive coverage that Revolver News has done on the pipe bomb issue specifically.
So what are the things that you've unearthed that we've learned about January the 6th you think are really essential for any audience to fully understand the picture?
Well, there's so much more that we can cover in the scope of this conversation, so I'd love to maybe come back and have this be an ongoing thing. But the short version, you can go to revolver.news, read our series of pieces. I think in a nutshell, there are two smoking guns at this point. One is the Ray Epps issue, and people can go and watch all the video and decide for yourselves what you think. And the other issue is the pipe bomb issue. And the pipe bomb, again, it's a big story. It's very suspicious how it was found and when it was found in the RNC side. Very suspicious how it wasn't found at the DNC side, given that, like, literally the Secret Service was there, did a sweep, and they didn't find it, even though the pipe bomb was allegedly at this park bench right outside of the DNC. So it's very weird. And then on top of that, we've discovered and proven conclusively that in the surveillance footage released by the FBI, they have censored or withheld, whatever word you want to use, footage that we know that they have that would depict the pipe bomber actually planting the bomb. Why would they do that? I don't know. They haven't answered. And additionally, they very likely tampered with the footage, because we've shown the frame rate of this footage is 1.2 frames per second, which doesn't exist anywhere commercially. And so we think that they tampered with this, which is one of the reasons why I'm saying we need to use subpoena power when we have it, basically to uncover the chain of custody of this surveillance footage and get the full and raw, unedited footage that I think will lead to some very, very dark and explosive places that the American people deserve to know.
Well, let's connect a couple ideas that you bring up, because I am totally all for that approach. But as you say, if we wait to win elections, it's going to be too late.
Right.
And most people at home who are watching this and who are on your website or on mine, they want to do more. So, So what can we do in the meantime, aside from coming up with $1 trillion for a SPAC fund? And not to say we shouldn't do that. It sounds like a great idea. But it's what are the steps that you see people can take right now?
Well, one thing that people should be aware of is that politicians, for the most part, outside of a certain group of core fighters on the J6 issue, like Marjorie Taylor Greene's been great, Matt Gaetz, Biggs, Thomas Massey. There have been a handful of real warriors on this, but outside of that, most elected Republican officials don't want to touch this. They'll only deal with it if there's sufficient public pressure to do so, and the public pressure is predicated on public awareness. So simply reading these stories, digesting the information, and sharing it with other people is the precondition for the public pressure necessary to keep these elected officials interested in the topic, which they would love, I'm telling you, they would love to move on to the next fake scandal of what AOC is doing. They don't want to touch this stuff that deals with the national security state for various reasons, some obvious and some not. So keeping up the pressure is a key issue. I think aside from elections as well, I think the RNC could be using the power of its purse more effectively. Remember, the regime has used January 6th as a broad brush to tarnish basically the entire Republican Party. Their reputations, even of the bad ones, even the ones who are, the rhinos, whatever, everybody's reputation is at stake here. And I think given the magnitude of what the regime has done to amplify J6, it's in all of Republicans' interests to uncover the truth about it. The RNC, we just learned, has spent a ton of money on all kinds of arguably frivolous stuff. You would think that the RNC could set aside some money to support and encourage whistleblowers within the national security establishment who would come forward and tell us more about this, give us more receipts. That's the kind of thing that we can be doing that doesn't require winning elections.
I agree with that. Do we know exactly what happened to all the money that was raised, mostly by President Trump, to fight for Stop the Steal cases? And has it all been allocated? Is there something there, perhaps, that maybe could be used on behalf of some of these investigations?
I think that would be a great idea. I think the money at Trump's disposal, the money at the GOP's disposal, at the RNC disposal. There's so much at stake here. Look, the regime is using January 6th in order to go after Trump and his supporters, to go after Republicans generally. There's no better bang for your buck than spending the minimal amount of money required to completely destroy the narrative. Revolver News, we're an upstart organization, we're in a shoestring budget, and we've done more to damage the official narrative than any of these GOP-affiliated institutions with millions and millions of dollars at their disposal.
This has been my main beef with the Republican donor classes. They'd rather put a lot of money into a candidate that will probably lose or maybe lose, and not enough into not just doing the investigations, but I think we've got an idea here. If there was a big reward for some whistleblowers who could really explain what's going on within our government and really what's going on within our deep state and within these tech companies, I mean, if you make those people even a little bit wealthy, they might actually do it. A lot of them are just protecting their careers, and it's why they're going along with these horrific missions that they're being put on by their superiors.
Right. Well, that's exactly why I just stated and why I've been doing it for some time now, is saying, look, the RNC, anybody, we need to set up a fund that will support these whistleblowers. And again, bang for your buck, the leverage per dollar spent of doing something like that vastly supersedes whatever nonsense they're wasting money on now. And so the problem is...
But it's cultural. We have to culturally get people convinced your money isn't best spent necessarily on whichever your candidate is.
Yes.
So that's fine. I'm not saying we need less money in politics. Even though I can, but just not. It's not for this conversation. It's got to go elsewhere too. We got to try different stuff. Why do we get wedded to tactics that don't work?
Well, I agree. And look, the Elon example, I think, is a great proof of concept here. The most effective operator in terms of restoring free speech to the internet, it's not an elected Republican official. It's somebody like Elon Musk, who's a private, successful industrialist. And yes, he made a lot of money through, certain dealings with the government, as, basically anyone who's a big deal in tech does so, because big tech at the highest level in the country is essentially IT support for the national security state. That's fine. But he's done a great job, and he's really shown, how to be effective, and it's not coming from the electoral politics system, it's not coming from the government, it's coming from a private actor who is more competent and more effective than the rest. And frankly, it's not a high bar, but I'm very grateful for the just fortuitous fact that he stepped in at the right time and we're actually getting some results.
But I do think this is the challenge for the audience, is that we need to raise the bar, not just be overjoyed with what Musk is doing, which is terrific and we're lucky to have it, but it's got to be the tip of the iceberg. It's got to be the first of a longer process of trying to unravel where the power is in this country, or else we're not doing our jobs. And I think our Americans can demand more than what we're getting, not just from our elite in the government side, but our elite in the business side. We deserve better from them as well.
Absolutely. And part of it is structural. Part of it is that the GOP is set up to be sort of a Robin to the regime's Batman. A really incisive point that I found somewhere on Twitter was basically that the GOP grift is grifting the process. The GOP grift is process oriented. It's through fundraising, it's through donations and everything, but basically it means that because it's independent of outcome, the relevant people dine well irrespective of whether we win or not. And when we win, they dine well irrespective of whether we deliver on the issues, versus the Democrat side. And this is not admirable, but in a way it represents a more optimal incentive alignment, which is that the Democrats' grift comes after a successful outcome. They win positions in the government, and their grift is using their power over taxpayer money to distribute to their clients, which is unfortunate. It's in a way one of the things that traditional conservatives have complained about for a while with some justification.
But it's the incentive system.
But the incentive system, they have to at least win, and so it represents a healthier incentive structure from the standpoint of delivering for their supporters. Our incentive structure is so perverse because the same bloated mediocrities will dine on their steak dinners whether or not they win, and that needs to change.